3 little children. They will be 6 years old within a few months. Yet, I want these young people to have a clean environment. Of course, we all do. We don't want them to be affected in a negative way, or any children in our country or around the world affected in a negative way. But the environmental extremists who dominate the majority party in this Congress are preventing us from developing our own energy resources and developing and preventing us from having the economic progress we need to come out of this crisis. At this moment, they are preventing massive amounts of fresh water, runoff from the snow melting in the high Sierras, from being channeled in California to the agricultural areas of our state. As we speak, at this moment, millions of gallons of fresh water are flowing into the ocean instead of being permitted to be used in the agricultural part of our state. All of this to protect a little fish at the demand of radical environmentalists. Radical environmentalists who obviously have the ear of the majority of people who are in this body. This little fish that they are protecting, the Delta smelt, is not even big enough to be used as bait. A fish that is not even indigenous to California. Yet the well-being of this little fish has been put by the powers that be in Washington, D.C., has been put on a higher priority by these political decision makers than the price of food for the rest of the population, including all of our children. It's been put on a higher priority than the jobs and well-being of farm-related workers throughout California and, yes, throughout the United States. Crops are withering in California. They are withering because water is not being permitted to go to them and it's being channeled into the ocean. That's the policy. Billions of dollars of wealth, as we speak, are being lost forever. And one asks why our economy is on the verge of collapse, why we haven't been producing the revenue, so we end up with $1.5 trillion of deficit. Well, policies in Congress, like putting wildlife and their well-being over the well-being of people, actually make things have brought us to this situation and actually are making things worse and are making it more difficult to work our way out of this economic challenge and this economic crisis. And it goes on and on. With higher energy prices, these higher energy prices, which are destroying the family budget, I might add, and pushing our country into an economic crisis, it's destroying the local people. Our ordinary people, their personal budgets are just destroyed, and they have no faith. They're losing hope because they can't see their way out of this pileup of debt because the economy is being strangled and they can't see a way they can prosper in the economy. That's what's happening to our people as individually, but as a whole, our country is in such an economic crisis. And what does Congress do? Because energy prices are, as I say, draining the family budget and draining the national budget. What does Congress do when it comes to energy? We pass a job-killing energy energy suppressant legislation, the cap and trade bill. This bill, which was passed this body in the midst of this economic crisis, and as the energy crisis loomed, this bill, which passed our body, will make it even more difficult to produce the energy that we now depend on. And the excuse? Well, this time it's not saving a little fish. The excuse for passing this economy-killing anti-energy legislation is what? Saving the planet. We can understand how we can they might want to save a little fish at the expense of all of us, but how are they going to save the entire planet from man-made global warming? Well, more and more evidence that this theory is bogus surfaces every day. The public and decision makers for 10 years were inundated by phony science, altered numbers, and outright fraud. Scientists who disagreed with the man-made global warming theory were cut from research grants and prevented from publishing peer-reviewed dissenting opinions. It's all coming out. Every day we see stories verifying that this fraud and what's been going on, the lies that have been told, the altering of numbers and statistics, the cherry picking of actual information that would be put into computers to come out with solutions. All of this is coming out more and more every day, yet the Congress ignores all of that, as does the science advisors of this administration. They ignore this evidence. They belittle it, claiming that the case, no, this is inconsequential direction so we can part of a global effort. Now, don't get me wrong. I believe in international trade. I believe really, actually, that in a robust trade between free people. And I believe such a trade between free people is a benefit to both parties, especially if the ground rules are fair and equal and negotiated out between the two peoples. A trade between democratic countries is a win-win. Well, there's obviously something seriously wrong when our economy is sputtering to a halt while our trading partners are going into high gear. Free trade between free people, which is my motto, should not be blamed for this, because the problem is not free trade between free people, because it's free trade between on one side and controlled on the other. Free trade with a controlled and autocratic government is inherently not free. If permitted to do so, which is what our negotiators have permitted, the power of economic activity will be directed by these tyrannical governments, like in China, to bolster the power of their elite, and it will be done at the expense, yes, of their own people's freedom, but it will be done at the expense of the economic well-being of our people. Under this guise of free trade, which has not been challenged, because it isn't free trade if you're dealing with a dictatorship like China, we have had policies aimed at creating a global system. That's why we're permitting the Chinese to get away with this, because we want them to be part of a global system which includes everybody, and that thus will have a positive influence on all of these other countries. Well, the global system will supposedly include everybody: dictators, rogue regimes, countries where people are treated like serfs by gangsters and criminals and tyrants. Sorry, we don't need free trade or to be in a binding relationship with those type of regimes. And we don't need to be controlled by a global trading establishment that will result from all of this planetary organization of commerce. And you can bet that that global trading establishment, the systems that will be set up, will be eventually dramatically influenced, if not dominated, by nefarious regimes and self-enriching elites. The WTO, which is what they're trying to create as a global system, will be and is becoming more like the United Nations. The United Nations, which was a theoretical dream, but in reality, a nightmare for free and democratic peoples. The UN is an organization that gives China, the world's worst human rights abuser, a veto. And it provides General Assembly votes to the likes of Burma, Iran, Cuba, and North Korea. Oh, that's a good gang that we should depend upon. We should make sure we're part of an organization that gives them an equal vote in the General Assembly to ours, or gives China a veto over anything the UN can do. And speaking of China, here too is an explanation of why our country is on the verge of an economic calamity. We've permitted Communist China a one-way free trade policy for the last 20 years. And yes, when it was democratizing and opening up, such a strategy might have been justified, at least for a time. During the Reagan years, we saw a liberalizing China. Reagan made it clear, and I know this because I worked with him on his speeches when he went to China. He made